Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm bringing you another book review from the classic original 62 book series, and it's book number 31, Night of the Living Dummy 2. Wow. It's been a while since I read this book. I think the last time I read this book, I was a teenager, right? And it still holds up. This book is such a different feeling slappy book. There's something about this. It's such a well-told character introspective with probably one of the best monologues I've read in Goosebumps dealing with the main character. It felt so honest and raw, and I like how proactive this character was. I mean, I want to save a lot what I want to say there for the end of the video, but this book, I would say, is one of the Slappy books I genuinely love. And this is coming from somebody who's not really a Slappy fan. You know, I love me some Slappy. My fondest memories, you know, I go back to Bride of the Living Dummy. That was my very first Dummy book. And as a child, that was one of my favorite Goosebumps books and episodes. I mean, I love me some Slappy. And Night of the Living Dummy 2, for it being the very first Slappy book, makes me realize what I love in Slappy. And I'll get to that near the end of the video, but yeah, this book, if you have not tried Night of the Living Dummy 2 before, it is a very different dummy book, but I think most people will love this in some way. I mean, I will struggle to find somebody that will not like this book. If you have not read this, go try this. This was really great in a lot of regards. It does have its few flaws, and we'll get to that near the end, but yeah, this was cool. Okay, so let's get into the plot overview without giving too much away. So, this book starts off with this girl named Amy, and she's the middle child in this family called the Kramers. She has an older sister named Sarah and a younger brother named Jed, and two parents that have a big, strong family bonding idea that they do once a week. On Thursdays, they have this talent show of sorts for the family to share something that they think is shareable, or, you know, something that's a talent, right? And the father's always, you know, doing music. The mom does what she does. Jed is kind of the clown type of character. He's kind of annoying. He's the younger brother. He likes to burp and play pranks and share those like they're his talents. And then Amy's shtick is that she's a ventriloquist, you know, being the middle child. And her ventriloquism and storytelling, she often tells stories too. You know, she'll tell like fantasy stories or whatnot, and then sometimes she'll use the dummy to make jokes, or maybe the dummy to tell stories. Her dummy's name is Dennis. And she feels that her act is inferior to her older sister named Sarah. Now, Sarah's a few years older than her, and she's like a really talented painter. And the whole family seems to be at awe with Sarah's talent. I mean, in the book, Amy reveals that Sarah's painting has been put into a museum. And she's really honest with the reader and upfront about her insecurities being a middle child and living in her older sister's shadow. And a lot of that feels relatable and raw. And she does not hide any emotion from you. So when you read this book, you really feel like you get to know Amy to the deepest of levels compared to a lot of other Goosebumps protagonists, which sometimes can come off like caricatures or surface level. This is about as deep as you can get in Goosebumps, right? And it's throughout the whole book. Well, Jed goes first, you know, and bees Jed. And then it's Amy's turn. And Amy starts her act with Dennis. And Dennis is a very old dummy. She's had him for a while, but his head tends to fall off, right? And while trying to make some jokes, her family's laughing at some, and then her siblings are making fun of her jokes, not thinking that they're funny, and this kind of annoys her. And while this is going on, Dennis's head falls off. And, you know, Jed's playing with the head, you know, using it to call Amy names and stuff. And the family seems to think that Jed's taking it too far. And Amy gets upset and tells her dad, well, this is why I need a new ventriloquist dummy. And the dad says, well, if I find one for a decent price, I'll buy it for you. They're just really expensive. And Amy's upset and just has had enough for the day. And her parents say that it's fine for her to, sit it out. And then it's our older sister Sarah's turn. And she has a fresh painting that she's left upstairs to dry. So the family goes upstairs to check out the painting. Well, it's been vandalized. And Sarah's at awe, and she has no idea who could have done this. And Jed starts laughing and reveals that it was a prank. And the parents, it seems like to Amy, the parents never disciplined Jed. He gets to do all this gross stuff and be a jerk, and he always gets away with it. But on this day, Jed finally gets punished and grounded. And her parents seem to be, pretty honest parents, and, I wouldn't say a template for a good set of parents in Goosebumps, but they are one of the better set of parents, and they're kind of active in the story too, which is kind of cool. But Jed gets punished. Now, because Jed got no backup from Amy, Jed decides to pull a prank on Amy by taking Dennis's head and trying to make her believe that Dennis is walking and coming to life. And once Amy realizes that it was Jed, Jed's like, well, I hope it didn't scare you too much. Amy's really annoyed about that, right? And she goes to bed. The next day, her friend Margot comes over, and they're talking about Amy potentially using Dennis to entertain kids at at Margot's father's restaurant, where he hosts birthday parties. And she said that she would love to, and love to entertain the kids, but Dennis is not a reliable ventriloquist dummy, and she needs a new dummy before she can do it. And Margot's like, all right. And once Margot leaves, Amy's dad brings home a brand new dummy and surprises her and gifts it to her as a, like, I'm sorry it's late kind of gift. And it's a brand new dummy. Well, not really brand new, but it was secondhand used. And she learns the name of the dummy. His name's Slappy. And there's a card in Slappy's costume as she's, observing the dummy. And inside is the magic spell that reveals Slappy. Makes him come to life, right? Or I guess unleashes him. And after she reads the spell, she thinks she sees Slappy blink. And then when the father, comes over to see what Amy's, staring at, Slappy slaps him in the face. And the father's like, why'd you do that, Amy? And she's like, oh, I don't know. I didn't do it. But Amy knows that if she starts to tell her father what happened, he's not going to believe her. And you get the sense that when these weird things with Slappy happen with her throughout the book, you get this idea that she can't really go to her family, even if she wanted to, because she knows that just seems unreal. But Amy doesn't let this get the best of her. She decides to practice with Slappy a little bit. And one day, it's, a couple days, after she got Slappy, and it's now Thursday, and she has to, share a new routine. So she brings out Slappy, and she's excited and eager. And she starts saying the routine. And at first it goes okay, and then all of a sudden, something's come out of Slappy that are just really mean. Commenting on, her father's baldness, and her mother's weight. And people start to get upset. And Amy's like, I'm not saying this, it's Slappy. And the parents are like, that's a bogus excuse. Dummies don't come to life, don't start with this. And Amy is pretty convinced that Slappy's the one doing this. But, like, in her monologue, she's like, well, even if she was, confident that was the case, it's hard to get her family to believe her. And she understands that. And that kind of awareness you just don't see in Goosebumps characters all that much. And I really appreciate that throughout this portion of the story here. Well, it gets kind of interesting, right? Well, Amy gets on the phone with Margot and says, she's now in trouble a little bit. but she would be happy to perform at her father's birthday venue because now she has a dummy, right? And Margot seems to be excited, and she says she's going to tell her dad. Well, that kind of gets in the way one day when Amy's working on a project at home. Nobody else is home. And she goes up to her sister's room to borrow something. And she notices that all of the paintings in her sister's room have been like vandalized and destroyed. And unfortunately for her, Sarah, her sister, comes home, and so does her family. And she is absolutely mortified. And Amy's mortified too. And when she's confronted by who did this, she's like, I didn't do it. And immediately they try to blame Jed. And Jed's like, well, I was here and I saw Amy go into her room. It had to be Amy. And Amy, of course, gets blamed. And there's nothing she can do, right? And she looks over at Slappy, who happens to be nearby, and there's paint on his shoes, and she thinks that it has to be Slappy, and Amy gets grounded, right? And maybe tries to blame it on Slappy a little bit, and her parents don't believe her again. Now she's grounded, and she's only allowed to go perform at the birthday party as she promised Margot's dad. And this upsets Amy a little bit. And now it's time for her to go perform at this kid's birthday party, right? And she goes there. It's a little 3-year-old girl and a little girl's birthday party, and she's showing the kid Slappy, and Slappy holds the hand of this girl, and this freaks the girl out, and the mom of the girl gets upset, and it takes a while to get Slappy off the girl, and essentially the father gets involved, the father of Margot gets involved and has to send Amy home, and Amy's broken up about this. She gets home and throws Slappy in her closet and just cries, and she feels emotionally defeated. I mean, like, she's trapped with this dummy, and she thinks she hears him snickering, and she doesn't know what to do, right? And to make matters worse, there's another thing that happens in Sarah's room, where there's Amy, 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 Amy written all over the wall. And of course, Amy gets blamed again, and she's pretty sure it's Slappy, who's now in her room, Sarah's room, holding a paintbrush. And she's convinced that it's the dummy, and she's like, you know what, screw it. It's Slappy, he's doing it. And the parents are like, all right, that's it. We're going to have to get you like some psychiatric help, or maybe a shrink, because this is just a cry for help. And of course, the parents are worried about, fixing up her room, Sarah's room, and then Amy, of course, is just destroyed and upset. But she thinks back to Slappy, and she's like, I'm going to prove that Slappy's the one doing this, right? So she needs to catch Slappy in the act. So she comes up with this plan to kind of ambush Slappy, and that may succeed a little bit, right? Comes to a point of the story where she finally catches Slappy, alive, and she confronts Slappy, and Slappy essentially tells her that you read the card, you're now my slave, and essentially, Amy's like, I'm not gonna be your slave, and he's like, well, your family thinks you're crazy, and I'm going to keep destroying things. And if you don't be my slave, I'm going to destroy things and make your family think you're so crazy they're going to send you away. And you don't want that to happen, do you, Amy? And she's like, well, no. And he's like, well, good. You're going to be a good long-term slave for me. And this is a type of Slappy you just don't see. Most of the time, Slappy's like a cartoon in these books. Here, he's actually like a cerebral villain, like playing mind games with Amy a little bit. And Amy's like, all right, whatever. Slappy, you talk all this talk. And she gets this idea that that she's going to play along a little bit and catch Slappy off guard again. Well, she has Slappy eventually in a position that could be, caught. And instead of going to wake up her parents, she decides to go to Sarah. And she goes to Sarah's room and she tries to get Sarah to believe what she said. Says, hey, look, it hasn't been me doing this. You have to believe me. And there's this big revelation with Sarah potentially knowing the truth. And reveals this to Amy. And you get this sibling bond with Amy and Sarah that is really good. I mean, one of the best things I think I've read in Goosebumps in terms of siblings, next to this the thing from I'm Your Evil Twin with Monty and his half sister. That was crazy. But yeah, this was really good, right? And once that bombshell's revealed, the two of them think of something to do, right? So they take it upon themselves to go to Slappy and try to take care of him on the spot. They take him outside and try to throw him into a sewer. Well, that doesn't work out because the next morning, Slappy's in the kitchen and he's dirty and needs to be washed. Mind you, there's 6 pages left of this book at this point. So this is one of the most rushed through climaxes ever in the history of Goosebumps. So, once this revelation happens, Amy goes to school and then she comes home later that night and has to come up with a new idea to get rid of Slappy. And essentially, this is where the ending happens. And there's this thing that happens to Slappy in Sarah's bedroom. And it's revealed that there's this huge plan made and put into motion. Potentially the whole Kramer family may or may not have been involved. And there's an instrumental part into bringing down Slappy that was supposed to be done by a particular party. But once you learn who the particular party is and what they were really doing, it raises some eyebrows and it kind of leaves the ending on a big old question mark of, well, did we really get ourselves out of this situation? And that's essentially Night of the Living Dummy 2. So, yeah, off the bat, Night of the Living Dummy 2 is just a well-crafted character introspective with Amy. I think Amy's one of the best Goosebumps main characters of all time. I mean, in terms of her honesty in her monologue, to her vulnerability, to emotions, to how emotional this book gets. And, yeah, the climax and the ending is literally 6 pages. But if you can look past that, the whole book was essentially building this narrative where Amy lived in the shadow of her older sister Sarah, and Amy just wanted to have something for herself. Once Slappy comes into her life, now her passion is kind of consuming her, right? And is getting her in trouble. And she can't convince her family that this is going on because it's ludicrous. And she understands it's ludicrous to think that a dummy has come to life and is doing all this stuff. She has so much awareness to her and maturity to her. And the way she handles her little brother feels smart in some areas. She's able to get some sly jabs at him. And she's able to, in some ways, be more emotionally mature than her older sister Sarah. I really applaud Stein for her character. I really do. And you get more of a character developing type of story than you do just a Slappy antics book here. But I really enjoyed where this book went with Amy, and especially with her relationship with Sarah. That was very wholesome, and I felt like the whole book was building to that point. Yeah, the reveal with Sarah is kind of wonky, but it works. It kind of feels last minute, but it surprisingly doesn't come off like a negative, right? And yeah, another positive I have with this book is just how cerebral Slappy is. I think Slappy is at his best when he's playing mind games with his victims. I mean, the sheer fact that Slappy could have just started antics from the beginning, but chose to sabotage things to get her in trouble, and knew that by getting her in trouble and making her family think that she's crazy and that she's just looking for a cry for help, there's no way that they will ever believe that he's actually alive. And because of this, Slappy's been doing this intentionally so that Amy has to be his slave to avoid getting sent away like a crazy person. And that's just really dark. Like, wow, Slappy. Slappy's known to do some really gross things in some books. He does some really kind of off-kilter, some silly things here and there. But him trying to manipulate people's lives is a whole different thing to me. And I think I appreciate that more out of his character than anything else, honestly. Slappy's really good in this book. Even though he does do some repetitive things, and I'll get into that in the negatives. But for the most part, I like the vibe of Slappy here. And yeah, this book is just well written, well paced. Doesn't have the greatest atmosphere, but it works. It's just one of those books that just fly by, and you're just glued to the page, and it's engaging with its characters. There's good character dynamics. Nobody feels like the same character. Everything just pops. It pops, and there's some really tense scenes involving Slappy, like the little girl's birthday party scene when he's holding onto her hand. Because the girl is 3 years old, there's something about that just feels really morbid, and it feels scary, like on a primal level. Like as an adult, especially as an adult reading it, when you see like a little 2 or 3 year old kid, like I have a 3-year-old niece, that gets to me a little bit. Like. I guess my paternal instincts are kicking on. It's well crafted. It's just a well crafted story, and I love the areas it goes dealing with the family and how the family's proactive in the story, especially near the end. And it even redeems a character. I'm not going to spoil who it is in some ways, maybe not outright, but there's intentions there, and I really enjoyed that. Even though the climax is one of the most shortest climaxes, I think, in the history of Goosebumps, and endings combined. It's like 6 pages. Despite that. Now, getting into negatives, I really don't have much, but I do have some here. And the biggest negative I have with this book, it comes down to the repetition of Slappy's pranks and sabotaging, right? What he does throughout the book essentially involves Sarah's paintings or painting Sarah's room. And not to mention, Slappy does this twice himself, right? He vandalizes paintings one time, and then he vandalizes the wall one time. And then he tries it a third time near the end of the book, where with this plan with Amy and all that. I didn't spoil that. I didn't say that when I was doing the plot overview. I don't really consider that a spoiler, so I don't mind sharing that. But he tries it a third time. And not to mention, Jed, early on, vandalized the painting himself. And I feel like throughout this whole book, there was 4 times where paintings were vandalized or a wall was vandalized with paint. And then Slappy was going to do it a 5th time. It just felt really repetitive, and I wish there was something else involved. Like, maybe like breaking the dad's guitar would have been a good change up, or maybe going into Jed's room and messing with Jed's room, or something else. Why Sarah? I mean, I feel like Stein chose Sarah's room to do repeatedly because Sarah was the sibling that Amy felt more insecure about, living in her shadow, and I think that's chosen on purpose there. But it's so repetitive, and I wish it had a little more flavor when it comes to Slappy, trying to sabotage things. It just felt like it was doing the same thing repeatedly throughout the whole book, and that got annoying just a little bit. And then, when we're dealing with the other negative I have, really, when it comes to this little 6-page climax / ending all in one, there's something revealed after what happens to Slappy, right? And there's something that comes out of Slappy when this happens. I'm not going to spoil what it is, but I think that's just a little weird. That's a little weird. I don't think that's ever been referenced in any other dummy book but this book. Why Stein chose to go with that? Why? I mean, the first dummy book with Mr. Wood gave a way better visual and idea there about what comes out of a dummy than what this book had. That was just really bizarre, and it felt really out of place. But, yeah, essentially those two things are my only negatives, right? And they kind of add up to be some serious substantial points taken off, but nothing too big to take it out of, like, an A tier. Every book I rate started at a 5, and I just deduct off that. And this one stayed in the A tier. This is one of the A tier Slappy books, in my opinion. So from a 0 to 5 star basis, with the problem with that thing at the end I don't like, in that rush climax and ending, dealing with what comes out of Slappy, and then of course Slappy sabotages throughout the book, feeling the same and repetitive, I only deducted 0.4 off. And I gave this book about a 4.6 out of 5. Now, I gave it a 4.6 out of 5. I could have been a lot harsher on it, but Amy was just so well done in this book, and that relationship with Sarah is so well, achieved in the story, that I went against my initial impulse to give it a B, and I wanted to give it an A, and I did. I held back from going too harsher on these things. And I gave it a 4.6 out of 5, which is a low A. It's an A to an A minus. This is a great book. Maybe not the best of the best. It's not a 5 out of 5 to me. But this is a very exceptional one. And I highly recommend this if you have not tried it before. So yeah, that's my thoughts about Night of the Living Dummy 2. Now, let me know down in the comment section. Do you love this book? Do you hate this book? I'm dying to know. And I'll see you next time.